Morning all. Can everyone in Zoom land hear me and see me? Good, thank you, Colin. Welcome everybody to our summer edition of the self-help group meeting. There's 50 of us here in the room today. 45 with dropouts, I think. So no one likes to drop out. Making me excellent cakes. Yeah, and terrible warm, lukewarm coffee. No, coffee. There's lots on the agenda today. 15 or 20 different topics on there, so plenty to get through. Just as a reminder to start with, in the room, please put your phones on airport mode. We don't want airplane mode. We're trying to preserve bandwidth. We don't want any of the problems we had last time, although that was at the golf club, not here. We're not expecting a fire drill. If the fire alarms go off, we go through that door there into the courtyard, where it looks like we're trapped and we have to watch the hotel burn around us. Hopefully there's a way out there. I think there is, yes, you can go out that way. For those who have driven, please remember to put your number plate into the iPad type thing on reception, otherwise you'll be sent a rather large fine. Toilet facilities around the other side of reception. That's we'll have lunch at 12:30-ish. We'll have a break about 11-ish. 11:15. Ish, Janet, ish. We'll see how we get on. See if we've got past item 1 by then. I think that's all the housekeeping rules. Zoom housekeeping rules, please stay on mute. I don't want that there, I've got mine on here. People don't need to see me twice, Janet. Please stay on mute. Shout if you can't hear us, or put your hand up if you've got the wave hands, or just raise hands, wave your hands at me, put your cameras on, whatever you need to do to get my attention. Put stuff in chat, and we'll try and get around to everybody. Like I said, nearly 50 people here and a dozen or so there, nearly 20 there. So yeah, lots going on, lots of people. General rules of the group, we're here to help one another. We all come from different backgrounds, different experiences. It's a self-help group for industry to help themselves, to learn from one another, to learn from our collective experience. There is no such thing as a silly question. Please bear in mind anti-competition law and confidentiality and all those kind of things we have to do. Yeah, and all comments welcome. Please feel free to ask questions, put stuff in the chat, put your hands up. More people that contribute, the more productive and informative this is. Introductions, new guests, new members, etc. Janet? Oh gosh, yes. Well, we have got several guests with us today, including Tom Gillett from Steptoe, who will be running a session for those of you who want to stay in the afternoon. Alistair Gardner from DBT. We have Catherine Terrell from BCF, who you may not know is a big supporter of the newsletter as well as the group, because if you see something very high level that's come straight out of the EU with a reader writes, well, I'm not saying it's Catherine, but I'm not saying it isn't either. And we have a few guests with us on our first meeting. I believe we've got Bethany from Verdant. You're out of luck, Bethany. Usually we are literally across the road from Verdant at the golf club.
To be fair, I live down the road, so it's actually easier for me.
Perfect, perfect. And I think we were expecting Anil Kumar from Ali Access, but he doesn't seem to have arrived. Yeah, and quite a few apologies. But we'll put those in the meeting. Yeah, excellent, thank you. We'll start with the first thing on the agenda, which is UK Reach. I guess it's a question for people. Go on, you. I was just going to say it's Michelle, isn't it? Oh, so it's your Michelle. Yes, your. Do you want to?
Yeah. So I think it's sort of. I'm not sure if this is exactly worded right, but it's coming from my EU offices, and they've asked me to check something. So we got a dossier under REACH in the EU. I believe there's a lead dossier which we've got a consultant for, and then we used another consultant to submit an individual dossier. And I was asked if people know whether that's going to be the same process in the UK or whether it'll be something different. Anyone knows if there's a process yet or whether. I know there's no process in the UK.
Has anyone submitted? So you've done an inquiry, or you did it NRES or a doing, or
So we've got doings for that substance. That's as far as I've got.
that's as far as you got. So has anyone progressed past the doing stage in the UK?
Will I need to do anything at the moment, or just wait out, or do we need to get a consultant on board? And do I need one for the lead dossier and the individual dossier? So I'm not doing a lot of reading. Because like pre-Brexit, obviously I just check state of age sheets. So when I'm getting asked questions like this, I'm getting a bit like confused. So I just like, that's it. Everyone probably needs knowledge, or I need to do anything still at the moment, or because we're waiting for the date still. Yeah. You want to? So you used a consultant last time, so does that mean, because we're under a member of a consortium for it? So I don't know if there's any consortium, like how that works with consortium.
All of the consultants are sort of
We're all on it.
We're poised.
My non-consultant advice, no, my pragmatic advice is, if you've done a doing that covers your registration, just hold that position for now until DEFRA tell us more.
It was interesting that you said that you were in a consortium. Has the substance been grandfathered into UK REACH on the grandfathering list?
I don't believe so.
That means that there isn't an existing full registrant, doesn't it, for UK REACH?
Potentially,
Potentially.
unless someone has registered it and gone an inquiry or an
Done-
NRES.
yeah.
So if you've got your doing in place, you've got ability to continue your business at least.
Yeah.
So if you do see that you have a need to have a registration in the long term, what I would say is if you haven't yet done it, submit an inquiry. And then that's the first stage of the registration process. Once you submit an inquiry, you can then see which other companies have also submitted inquiry. So then you're in a position then at some point to communicate with them as and when we have detail about policy. We've already registered some of our substances fully, and we're receiving queries from potential co-registrants saying, hey, we want to join in your joint submission, we want to, how much do you want from us, or how much do we have to pay? And what we're telling them at the moment is, you have means to continue your business without entering into a joint submission. Whether you can submit a late doing or submit an NRES or something like that. So we're advising our colleagues internally, and we're communicating to other companies, basically saying we're not doing any kind of joint submissions or letters of access or data sharing until we have some kind of certainty where the policy sits.
Yeah. Just as I say, it's a whole new world for me, and I'm trying to understand it. And then my European colleagues are quite versed with it, but they obviously don't understand the UK side. I'm like, we haven't really got anything yet, so I don't really know. But yeah, because obviously we're part of a consortium, and then we've got the lead dossier with one consultant and the individual dossier with another consultant, and I just.
But if you are in a consortium of companies, how often does this consortium sit and discuss?
Yeah, I'm not really
and that's if they haven't, perhaps they haven't, got together for 2 years, or perhaps there's a need then, to call whoever your chair or whoever organises your consortium to say, hey, we need some kind of, catch up, on UK REACH progress and substances of interest.
Neil, can I ask a quick question about making the inquiry in this instance? because it's for a specific substance, would you be required to have the substance identity profile
Yeah,
information?
Yeah, but I think that from Michelle, I think she said it was registered by your company in the EU
Yeah,
anyway, so you do have that.
You have that.
You have that level of
I think
information.
I'd probably say just stay to make a lot of it is perfectly passive, yeah, so we've got the information because we make the substance, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you are going down this route and you don't have your substance identity profile, that's going to cost you a couple of grand, whatever, to get it together.
Yeah, that's a challenging barrier.
Yeah, that's normally what takes the longest period when there's already existing data. Just a word of caution, if your substance ID is quite old, it might not be suitable and sufficient anymore. You might have to do some more analytical work, but it's fairly straightforward stuff depending on the nature of the substance.
The only other bit to add, as things stand at the moment, somebody will have to be a lead registrant,
Yeah,
whether it's yourselves or another UK company,
yeah.
but they will have to be a lead.
Yeah, and then like Christians might be happy to do that because it's such a big project, like substance for us, it's not something that's, we make it a bit like, it's our main thing.
The lead registrant is one of the biggest problems that people are facing at the moment, because if you think about it, there are only just less than 3,000 substances that are grandfathered over, but there's nearly 30,000 substances in the EU. So that leaves us with like 27,000 substances that may have doers, but nobody coming forward as a lead registrant in the UK yet.
Even the grandfather dossiers will still need updating to full dossier data.
It will at some point.
Yeah, just because you've grandfathered a member registered doesn't mean it's say that you're putting your hands in the air and saying I want to be lead. And I don't know. So it might be worth approaching whoever is the lead in the EU and just say, hey, would you intend to continue this position in the UK as well? If they're a multinational company with a market in the UK, then chances are they probably would.
And I think that's a great point, Neil, because in terms of data sharing, you want the lead in the EU and the lead in the UK to either be the same or to work really closely
It'd make
together.
it less complicated.
But it's for now you plan on doing it, so you do it.
Yeah, that's what we did, because as I say, we put so much of it across our like 3 countries in the UK. That was like the first thing on the list of doing, so we've all done those for the like the UK.
Putting your inquiry in and entering that substance group doesn't necessarily get you anywhere, because what you'll find when you get to that stage, in most cases, is you'll be sat there with a bunch of other people who also don't want to be lead, and will be sat there, but no one volunteering to be lead, and no one wanting to continue testing or anything, because we don't know what's going to be in the test requirements.
Yeah.
So you'll actually just be sat at a slightly further stage, but not doing anything, and also wondering what your next step is, and you'll be sat there until the people who are doing join the group, which is not the way we actually get
Soon,
later
later
this
this
year
year.
to a likely deadline, which is questionable at this point. So
Is anybody else
so
having like a flashback to when nobody wanted to? Exactly,
Yeah.
yes.
so what
Everybody sits on their hands and then suddenly everything happens at the last minute if you're not careful.
It's the same, like, because, before, when you just check state stages, oh yeah, they've got a reach number, or we like, ring there, check there, said, oh, okay, have you got, oh yeah, we have, okay, that's it. And that was our reach, like, done. This is a whole new, like, world for us, so I'm just trying to learn.
sit on your do it for as long as you can.
Yeah.
Until.
But don't sit on it too long.
Until that
Yeah.
comes out. So,
Thank you very much.
Jennifer has put, sorry, I was just going to say, Jennifer has put in the chat, and this will go in the notes, the list of grandfathered registrations, so that's there to refer to. So this is-
Yeah, I remember a trade body.
Yeah,
CBA or
yeah.
things like that.
Yes.
These challenges that you have now as a new registrant do feed that up, because they will be looking for examples such as your company,
Yeah.
where UK Reach being a new registrant is a significant new skill, or
Yeah, because I did that with, like, spoke to Elaine about like a few CLP issue things, and she said she'd read that, so I'll get in touch with her.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, okay. Next question was,
Oh,
oh, have
that's
you
me.
got, is that you, Janet?
Yeah.
You, go on.
It's just that we're doing, obviously, one of the things we do within the business is we help people with their classification labeling safety data sheets. And we're finding a lot of people getting GB safety data sheets with the UK REACH registration number if it has it, but no EU REACH registration number on products that they are then formulating and sending into the EU. And they know that it's registered under EU REACH. And there seems to be this gap. You know, people are only putting one of the registration numbers on, even though there's still this massive trade between both the EU and GB. Is anybody else having this kind of problem? Where, you know, you're selling into the EU, but you don't have the data on REACH registration?
We have various members trying to use the import REACH.
Yeah.
To keep the downstream users. And we have the authorities requested the full REACH registration number and not hiding the last 4 X's. And we've actually had over requests to actually confirm that the registration has come to exactly your supply chain, so that you can claim import.
Prove that.
Yeah, you've got where to prove that, so you actually don't need, even if you use a place the registration number, but with the 4 X's, that's not enough for you.
No, they need the full one.
There's
We've had that as well.
There's an EU REACH enforcement program on at the port of import.
Yeah.
So that'll be why that's started to happen. They're checking imports to make sure they're registered, and they'll need that proof of registration and identity at that point.
Well,
We've had it from Swedish authorities requesting it for suppliers in Sweden that they actually didn't need to register themselves.
Interesting.
There's no legal obligation, is there, for UK safety data sheets to contain
No.
no,
detailed
none.
EU information?
It's
It's like the party first placing on the market in the EU should supply the data sheet locally.
yeah, and
And
then
then
if
the end of the import though, about being able to
Well,
track your
yeah.
registration is still valid down the supply chain.
Yeah.
And that's got to be the communication.
yeah,
channel.
I suppose what this is more of a plea. If you have got customers who you know are selling things back into the EU, put the EU REACH registration number on, as well as any UK REACH registration number that you have. And it would probably apply in the EU as well if they, you know, if they're using an OR or whatever and they have a UK REACH registration. It will make everybody's life a lot simpler. Even if it's got the XXXX, at least it's saying in the first instance. Because we've had people who've gone back through like 3 steps of the supply chain, and yes, it does come from the EU. But then somebody in the middle of the supply chain in GB's go, we're not going to tell you that. And it's like, no, we just need to know where you bought it from, so we can ask them to disclose under an NDA what the last 4 digits are.
Yes, you've got to be able to, if your imports are covered by someone else's OR, which is legitimate, you need that chain of custody of compliance. And we often get our clients purchase externally from the UK, and their suppliers will say, yes, we've got an OR, you're fine. Can you prove that to us then? Can you show who is your OR? We're not disclosing our OR. Okay, so yeah, you can't.
When the OR needs to know who the importer is.
Yeah, and that's about people in purchasing understanding that they can't buy from somebody if you haven't got that data, and that's a problem everybody's having, really, isn't it? So right.
Adam's saying they issue 2 SDSs, one for GB, one for EU. Send both.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
Yeah.
not everybody does that. Colin's got his hand up as well.
Sorry, Colin, go on.
Good morning, all. Yeah, it's an interesting one, this, and I deal with a company who's got interests both in the UK and in Europe. And a lot of the problem with things like importers and distributors in the EU is you don't know whether they're going to need to register or not. You know, if they're buying one product from one UK manufacturer, it's got they're importing 900 kilos a year of a substance, then of course they don't need to register. If they're importing 1,100 kilos, then they do need to register. And the comment was actually made about leaving the last 4 digits off the REACH registration number. You know, my understanding was that registration has to be in the supply chain that you're in. So it's a bit awkward then. Re-import clause as well, of course. Now, if something started in the UK and ends up back there, then the EU importer has a duty to prove where it came from. But I think the whole thing's very, very complicated, and I honestly don't know. When I write European safety data sheets in inverted commas, yeah, you can put a reference number on there, but it doesn't really mean that it's registered.
Yes, you could have picked up a registration number from anywhere.
It's not on a website.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. happy
Any
with
more? Any more on UK Reach? Whilst we're on UK Reach.
that.
Oh,
Jennifer?
No.
Good morning. A few comments. It's really easy for UK Reach. It's actually really easy to do an inquiry registration. It really doesn't take much time at all. I've had inquiry registrations come back within 48 hours of submitting them, and they're usually, here's your inquiry number, proceed to registration as and when you need to. So if you're trying to import a huge tonnage, you can then go straight to registration, and you need to fill in a section in IUCLID section 14 to say that you will join and be part of the joint submission, and that will waiver a lot of your joint submission information in the first instance, whether you're registering as a full substance or as an intermediate. So the process is really quite straightforward. They've tried to make it so, which is nice, but unless you put in that specific note in section 14 of your IUCLID dossier, you will be expected to submit a whole load of additional information, which you probably won't have. So that's my first comment about UK Reach. About EU Reach, you can check to see if a registration is active using the ECHA profiles. You can, if you've got the 4 digits on the end, you can see if a registration is active or not. But also you can go back into the old system and see which registration numbers have been deactivated or made inactive by ECHA. So there are ways for you to find out whether an EU Reach registration number is still active or not, but you do need that 4 digits at the very end.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Cool. Thanks,
Cool.
Jennifer.
takes us nicely into EU.
Yes,
Reach.
we'll segue seamlessly into EU Reach, but well, into polymers.
Oh, this was an absolute cracker. We met this lady called Stephanie Harvey Harris at Chem UK, which was a very successful meeting for the group, by the way. And hello to everybody who is here as a result of meeting us. Thank you for joining the meeting. And she was saying at what stage, you know how we're going for polymer registration, the EU's moving towards polymer registration. We've got monomer registration at the moment, and the whole thing's, they're arguing about how these polymers should be defined, aren't they? And she said, well, at what stage is a polymer not considered to need a REACH registration? And she held up like a bit of plastic and said, you know, would this piece of plastic, this plastic article, be considered to need REACH registration? What bit does the polymer registration end?
Are you looking at me?
Because that was basically what we did to this poor lady on the stand. We were like, we don't know, we're going to ask the group.
It's an interesting question. And my first thought is, let's wait to see what the legislation looks like when it comes out. What they're intending is to get the notifications of what all the polymers are before they decide what to do with them. So it will be a long way down the road.
Ooh, yeah.
They're not going to go immediately for polymer registration, but it'd be a notification, work out what the polymer universe looks like, and then make some decisions by delegated act, which...
I'd expect it to be similar to the article bit where the function and design
yeah.
of the product is more important than the physical chemical makeup.
Yeah, that was the next.
I wonder how different a brief to the way that we currently have it for metals.
Yeah, that's what we mean.
That's kind of how I would expect it to happen in terms of chemical function versus physical.
I think also consider it as we do with monomers. If you're bringing in an article polymer, you don't register the monomers because you're bringing in some Tupperware. If you're bringing in the master batch, you do register the monomers.
Yeah, so it's just your polymer pellets to make whatever, then yes, I mentioned subject to registration of the monomers. But
Yeah, I wouldn't expect the definition for article to change on
No.
the REACH
No.
revision, but it may be slightly adjusted, but
Yeah.
it's going to change significantly.
So they've got these read acrosses then to existing things that they wouldn't, to the articles and to the monomer situation as it stands.
So there's nothing in there at the moment that would change the definition of substance mixture of the article.
Yeah.
And my question to you would be, what shape was that piece of plastic she held up? So.
Yeah.
I've come out of that meeting because I've gone on to GHS one. So yesterday when he came down round to ask about that product and we says, oh, we're changing it over. So it'd be an ideal time to.
Right, yeah, sorry. Slightly random. But yeah, so it is a bit of a watch this space, but yeah, clearly master batch would definitely be included. But the article probably isn't, but we don't know till they've gone through the process.
Yeah, that's how I would see it at the moment, but yeah, still a while off before we have.
Yeah, I would expect to see a couple of them in the borderline cases document.
Yeah.
But otherwise, generally mixture substance.
I was thinking, I'm thinking in context of the Instagram videos I watch, guys building their own racing cars in the garden shed, and they start with a big piece of carbon fibre and they make a mould.
Yeah.
At what point does that become an article?
It's because I already know that there's some discussion underway about the raw material for this. So that's already on the desk of the borderline commission, borderline working group. So I know that these discussions are already underway.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that'll sort our new friend Stephanie out.
Yeah.
Quickly.
Okay. Next question on. Oh, sorry, there's someone.
It's Neil. He's the
Neil.
next
Oh, you're over.
Other
I
Neil.
can't see you behind. Ali.
Well, ECHO publishing report requirements for the microplastics restriction, the EU 2023-2055, it was back in April. Now what we produce have got derogated due to industrial use, and when they're finally used by the end customer, they're going to be permanently incorporated with solid matrix. I was just wondering whether anybody else has been asked this by the customers about how much of the synthetic polymer microparticles used for when they have to be reporting in 2026 for 2025. Has anybody's got any advice? And also, how would you measure the estimation of the emissions accurately?
I'll throw that open to the room. Any microplastic experts?
So, SEPA member companies are being asked to ask their suppliers whether or not they're following disclosures to contain SPMs. So yeah, paint manufacturers have been asked to ask the dispersion manufacturers do they contain SPMs.
Yeah. That's where I think that we've been going back asking our suppliers. There's fortunately not too many of them getting the information together.
Yeah.
But it's how accurate the information is that comes back and how would we report it as well accurately, and is that alternate to me since we get work with.
Yeah, and they've done some work within their what they call their ESRA group, which is like risk assessment group, looking at where they see reporting as an industry.
So I'm not surprised we're starting to get questions around microplastics because we're approaching kind of the deadline in October, which is for the new application part of the restriction. So one thing we're trying to do at the minute is get our SDSs ready and start to include the information, certainly for the 4A, we just released the derogation. As part of that, we've got to start including on the SDS prevalence, how much microplastics present or synthetic polymer particles, and also the generic polymer name. Now, we've been, as much as the restrictions kind of been around for over 18 months now, certain information we've been waiting for before we can kind of update the SDS and get that information on there. Big part of that's been the generic polymer name. Now, we haven't had that from ECHO until it was published in April from the reporting requirements. So we've not been able to get that information into our SDSs to then pass that down to our customers, but obviously everyone's working towards that October deadline for that. So that's probably why you're not seeing that information coming through from the suppliers yet, because everyone's been sent up.
We will have to be asking our suppliers, and it's one of these where the situation where they bring a regulation out, but then don't say how you comply and what's needed.
Yeah.
Quite a bit further down the line.
It's one of the ones as well that often day is the same for everybody. It doesn't help the downstream users that are still waiting for suppliers to let them know if the products are actually used over the restriction or not. The industry is going to be derogated, making their own place for industrial use. It just contains goods, and then they derogate it to fuel forming. But we don't know if we use the latex dispersion. The polymer there is actually a solid or a liquid. So they're waiting for that from their suppliers, and that's not an easy thing to measure.
And the customers will probably think we've got the information to hand straight away.
And everyone's working to the same day, which doesn't help.
Yeah, I would be going with to the best of our knowledge on any site that we do get.
Yeah, we can deal with this kind of thing in terms of well, not too many products, that's all that with all the products we think may potentially have microplastics. We've investigated, drawn a line in the sand at this point in time that nothing does. And we've now started any new suppliers or any changes. We've started to ask that question to our suppliers as well.
It's worth remembering the first report deadlines for plastic feedstocks. So it's not kind of a restriction that needs to be later. So it's going to be the plastic pellets and feedstocks.
The labelling requirements.
Labelling requirements are for long term. What I would say is the Commission have put out its chemistry value, this is 3 parts, it's quite complex.
Yeah. Well, we can put links to that in the notes if anybody's affected. Tony, did you not have a thing where you had a query about microplastics and the surfactants? Was it last year or the year before?
We use some waxes in emulsions.
And they're covered by it, aren't they?
Yeah, because they're above a certain size. They're above 1 micron, probably less than 100 so they fall in that gap.
Yeah, because it's not just plastics in the conventional sense. It's covered by the microplastics. It's larger organic chemicals, basically, isn't it?
And what we obviously we supply these things and people formulate them into the products, lubricants and things like that. So how we actually work out how the emissions will go when they're put into floor polishes, I don't know. I really don't know, because how do I? Is it going to be mechanically cleaned? We have to look at that. And is there any evidence? So, how do you start to formulate that?
I mean, that was what you were saying, Neil, wasn't it? How do you calculate the emissions? And I think the thing is maybe do what you need to do now around labelling and safety data sheets and work your way up almost. Yeah, it's going to go through the supply chain one way down from you with the SDS, and then you need it back up. Oh God, I'm having flashbacks to 2008. You're right, Nicola.
The problem is you can't really reformulate because properties of water soluble.
Yeah, you need it to make the formulation work. Yeah,
waxes that were biodegradable just don't have the properties. So you're stuck.
Yeah. The UK is looking at this from the other end of the supply chain as well. On Friday, Parliament, there's going to be a reading of potential new bill to look at mandatory installation of microplastic filters on household appliances. So dishwashers, kitchens, all the rest. So they are looking at addressing it at the other end of the supply chain.
Oh, the famous end of pipe solution, as we say in environment. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah. Could I just go back very briefly to UK REACH, because I know a lot of people were asking about the ATRM and sorry.
So the UK definitely decided to report on microplastics, and they published a report on their options to do regulatory management of microplastics in the UK. They're listed not as one looking at sports pitches, and one looking at sort of similar to.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, if you send it through again, we can put the link in. Yeah. It's interesting that they're going down the household with the microfibers from clothing.
Yeah, and all the elections we've got in that we don't know.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Just in the room, if people can speak up a little bit, it's a bit quiet coming through on the other end for people.
Yeah.
And the notes will be comprehensive to everyone out there in Zoom world.
Yeah. Yeah, if I could just go back very briefly to UK Reach. We've had a lot of people think, what's going on with UK Reach and what's happening with the ATRM and everything. And I'm hoping that we will perhaps discuss this with Tom in the afternoon session. I mean, I know you've got EU Reach, but rather than do the politics side of Reach in this session, we're doing more the practical side of things. Right, yeah. Back to you.
Okay. Any more on Reach EU or UK without the politics before we move on to CLP? GBCLP, is this one of yours, Janet? Is there any sign that the UK might adopt the new EU CLP classifications?
Again, I think this was somebody we met at Chem UK. So yeah, it was just.
Yeah, I think the discussions I had with your voice the Chem UK is until it gets into UNGHS.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what I heard.
Yeah.
From HC, but interestingly, declaration that we have PFAS. Recently, and they're going to look looking at PMT to inform what they might do.
But if you check that, so basically they DEFRA produced this thing saying, yeah, PFAS, we're going to bring it into UK Reach. We're looking at doing it that way. And then there was the doubling down on, we are not adopting these within GBCLP until it goes through the GHS committee.
But it's interesting that there was somebody going to use the same properties.
Yeah, and the same definitions, etc. Yeah. Because of course PBT, BPVM is already in UK Reach, which is where it started.
They said that it wasn't predictive of it being harmful in itself, but that it could potentially, in combination with other factors, be an indication of concern, and therefore it could be used to prioritize substances of concern for Reach. So it wouldn't be something they would look at the CLP, but they would use it as a prioritization factor for Reach. So that's why they listed the PMT criteria that the EU was using, and said that in the case of PFAS, it was a useful indicator. So that's what the paper basically says. So it says we acknowledge that PMT can be an indication of concern, but it's not always an indication of concern. And we will use that as an indication that something may need to be prioritized in Reach if it shows PMT properties, but that is not always the case. And therefore, it's not suitable to just blanket classify. And that is the stance, very much the stance that they've taken into UNGHS. So if you look at the notes from the working group for the UNGHS, there is not support for that in general, and endocrine is still very much the UNGHS committee working group as well. So
I mean, a couple of the presentations at Chem UK were talking about the difficulty of effectively creating a suite of criteria that can be actively measured accurately for these new kind of classification endpoints. And I think that's where a lot of concern in the UK comes from, a lot of concern in the other countries comes from. And that's why we're generally feeling that the EU is perhaps pushing ahead a bit too quickly on this front. But in terms of the kind of PMT thing, it's worth noting that PBT and BPVB has been criteria for SVHCs for quite a long time now. So how is adding PMT, BPV, whatever it is, to PFAS really any difference
to that, we haven't had a GBT classification, GBCLP yet. Unless it comes in this new classification.
So the UK stance is we're not taking it till the UNGHS does. If you look at the notes from the UNGHS working committees, it's very much still up to debate.
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion is that whoever's dealing with GBCLP within the HSE has decided this is the hill they're going to die on. And they're absolutely not doing it until it comes out of the UN. So.
Looking at work to start by then, so we've got at least 2 years discussion, and then you've got to make an agreement. So yeah, it's quite a while.
It's still in work as well. It's not made it, you know, I'm working with partners, so it's not coming fast. Yeah, they even want to push for it. They want it very fast. Their initial prediction was that it'd be by 2028, as in rolled out in purple book by 2028. That ain't happening.
Does anybody know the reason for the timing of because it seems to me a lot of the statements that they're making are things that aren't surprising, and it seems to be things which, you know, might be case anyway. It's not an awful lot either. So I wondered if anyone had any sense for why now, clearly because this work of the HSE and see that work that's coming out. But I wondered whether at the time that policy paper was significant.
Not substantiated, but I was heard and told I can't substantiate this because just discussion rumor on sort of
Could you speak up, please?
Yeah. So there was the discussion rumor amongst other consultants that I talked with that DEFRA and the HSE were told basically don't do any announcements before the EU trade deal. So there was a noticeable lack of stuff coming out and positions, etc. And it wasn't just around chemicals, it was around everything. So if you look at like the DEFRA daily news report, there's normally about 20 headlines on there. It was literally just 8, which was just like the sites that are always on there. So there was a noticeable lack of things coming out prior to the trade deal. And then obviously the trade deal was announced, and then other announcements started coming out, and they weren't all necessarily in line with the trade deal. So they weren't all things that have been held back that were in sync with EU announcements. It just looked like literally these were things that they had in the pipeline that they held back, and then they suddenly had a green light again to start posting. So I think it was literally just that. And then it wasn't necessarily timed to coincide with anything. It was just something that had previously been queued up to release, and they held it.
They also had to do something to release it. What about releasing them in April, and they couldn't for local elections. So
I think this is getting dangerously close to being not interesting to most of the group members.
Sorry.
Said with laugh, ladies, but yeah.
Kind of comment addressing what you mentioned about how potentially this is a hill that people at HSE are going to die on. There's a lot of feeling in industry and everywhere at KUK about how we need to avoid divergence, avoid divergence. I'll be honest, the boat sailed past it, and it's long since gone. So why not use this as an opportunity to take the kind of more rational approach, rather than just rushing through some additional classifications because the EU is telling us to, and we don't even have a voice in the EU anymore. So actually, it's probably one of the few areas where I think the UK taking a bit of a stance and going, no, we're waiting till we've got the data, which is what it's going to need to get through the UN before it starts implementing. But that's potentially my opinion, because I work in software, so I don't know.
but
the problem is Northern Ireland, right? Because most people here won't have a method by which to segregate stock, segregate labels for what's going to England, Wales, Scotland, and what's going to Northern Ireland. Now, when they passed the EU CLP label changes, They tried to pull what's called the Stormont Break political mechanism to stop it going through in Northern Ireland. And the decision of Parliament was that it would not cause substantial disruptions to people in Northern Ireland on a day-to-day basis, and therefore it would go through and it would be fine. And the logic that politicians gave to this was that UK companies would essentially choose to voluntarily follow EU rules to make trade easier. Well, that's fine when it comes to formatting and all of those changes that came in with the label changes. But it's not fine when it comes to differences in classification that we literally cannot put on a GB Scotland Wales label. And it has to be on a Northern Ireland label. That is true divergence that we cannot avoid. And I don't think that was recognised by Parliament at the time. So the issue here is Northern Ireland. It's one that we can't get around. There is no mechanisms by which we can get around that. If it makes people feel any better, the EU has recently done what they called a reality workshop. Generally was the title, where they sat down with stakeholders. And it wasn't, so it was a different department, it had a really weird name. I have the paper, I'll send it to you because it's really funny. It's got 10 minutes, it's really funny. Where they wanted to know what the actual feedback around CLP was. And the actual feedback around CLP was, this is not going to work. It's just not going to work. They cannot do this. They can't implement these label changes. It's going to cost millions for industry to implement. Format labels are ridiculously expensive. The changes to adverts just don't work. I mean, have you seen the size of a LinkedIn advert or a little header on a website? You can't fit all the hazard information in that box. What planet were the politicians on when they made these changes? They've summarised all this feedback in a nice little 3-pager, and they've sent it to CARICOM for discussion first week of July. I'm really looking forward to seeing how that discussion goes, because the first recommendation of the reality workshop was you need to roll these changes back immediately, or at least extend the deadlines massively. So that was the EU Commission in their response to CARICOM. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where that goes and whether or not that will help us. If that does end up coming in, like we get a significant extension, maybe we can actually have a serious conversation with HSE about what we're going to do in Northern Ireland, because I can't answer that for you guys. I don't have a suggestion for how you segregate stuff and sort of label it out when most people's ERP systems can't do that.
But I mean, Northern Ireland is going to be an issue either way, because if it follows the UK, you can't separate the units.
Right.
So I'll be honest, it's lifting my feet. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Well,
That follows us nicely into the next one. How are people in the UK dealing with the new EU label requirements? Any tips?
I'm looking at Simon from Hibiscus at this point. How are your customers finding dealing with all of this?
In terms of formatting and the minimum font size, I think we've got some products, we've got some very and some. The ones that we've taken software, I find it easier because if you click switch and it does all the bits for you. If it's pre-printed and there's large stocks there, it's a little bit more difficult.
Has anyone come across any enforcement action on labels yet?
No.
No, we'll see what the PCS say to us next time we try to do a submission though.
Yeah.
That's our usual way of doing things. We send things to PCS and see what they tell us to do.
Yeah.
So is this now enforced? Is this now mandatory?
Not in a
phasing period.
No, phasing.
That's a transition date. First of January 27th, the label.
But for the classification.
It is, but not the
new
label.
stuff on the market.
That was May, wasn't it? Yeah.
And that's a new batch on the market, not a new.
Yeah, that's
product.
a good point. Yeah. If you're putting something new that you've just made, then the new label requirements
Well,
Well, the new
any-
classification requirements kick in, which means you need the new, but not the label format.
Yeah.
So,
At the end of the new 6 hazard classes for substances. came in from the first.
Yeah.
yeah,
So has anyone seen any substance STS with those new classifications on? So we've got mixtures.
yeah, just for people in Zoom land, Catherine saying, has anybody got any substance safety data sheets that have got the new hazard classification on them? That came in on the 1st of May.
We've told clients to put them on. Whether they have done or not is a different matter.
Because of the downstream users going to need that information.
Yeah.
To do their classifications by their deadline.
Yeah.
People in Zoom land haven't come across them either. Oh,
Yeah.
Just to go back
Again,
to
it's an EU classification, so
So why- yeah.
if you're GB based,
why would you see it?
you need that.
Yeah.
Which is onto the EU market.
Into the EU market, yes.
But it doesn't need to be on a GBS.
That's the thing that I like when somebody in the room said that they're doing a GB and an EU SDS for the same product.
2 different SDS.
Two different
Yeah.
SDSs. Yeah.
But the legal responsibility for the EU compliance is the EU importer, not the GB company.
Yeah, but
But-
GB companies often.
Yeah, and it also comes down to contractual obligations as well. If your contract says you must supply us in the EU with an EU SDS, even if you don't have a legal entity there and it's not valid, they still want all of the EU information.
They want
don't
the data so they
Yeah.
can Tipex out your.
Yeah,
let go
yeah.
on theirs.
Exactly. Oh, Kerry's got a question. Is it correct that if an SDHC for a category that is one of the new hazard classes, the substance is automatically classified?
They gave themselves the power with which to do it.
That's Alice just saying they've given themselves the power with which to do it, but you still have to wait for it to go onto the SDHC list, presumably.
So if something is an SVHC, because it's an endocrine disruptor, it's PBT, PMT.
Yeah.
Then they gave themselves the ability with which to automatically put it onto Annex 6 for the harmonized classification of those new hazard classes. However, it still has to actually make it onto the list. Realistically, if you are making manufacturing a batch of that after May 1st of that substance, you are still obligated to classify it with the new classifications. So it will ultimately make it onto Annex 6 without them having to do the whole ATP process, because they gave themselves the power to do that.
But there is still a process to go through.
There's a process to go through, but yeah, I suppose, Kerry, I'm not sure about this. Are you saying, could we use the SVHC information to classify?
Sure.
Yes, the answer is yes, you should. Great question, by the way. I don't know, I mean, I've got too much data and too few brain cells.
That, again, Catherine has asked about EU GB divergence.
You were bringing it up, but I think we've kind of covered it anyway, haven't we?
Yeah, I've got a question that I quite like to throw out, which is associated with it. So, I've got a client who's got a product and they're trying to classify the transport under ADR. Now, ADR is an international regulation, so it should have the same classification wherever it's placed on the market.
I know where this is going.
So, the client's got a product that's got limonene in it at a certain concentration. So, it's quite acute. Well, a classic product in the UK and not in the EU. What do you do?
So in ADR, in 2.2.9, somewhere in there is a statement that says if you have no data for your mixture and it is classified under EU CLP as a chronic 1, chronic 2, acute 1, then you classify it as an environmental substance.
Did you hear that, Adam? He's asked the same question.
Yes,
I don't know exactly where it is in 2.2.9, it moved where it was, but
It only
EU, if it's classified under EU.
I mean, don't forget, it's only one of the isomers of limonene that's had the reduced classification as well, isn't it? It's the limonene, yeah.
Oh, it's all
Yeah.
classification.
Yeah, so we've come across this many times with a lot of our clients because in the fragrance industry, limonene's in just about everything. what we're asking our clients is, well, which way do you want us to go? Because we'll end up with a GB and an EU safety data sheet. The GB says H411 because it's got enough limonene in to trigger it at H410. And the EU one says, no, it's an H412, so it doesn't get an environmental label at all. So we're generally asking the client, which way do you want to go? We're kind of pushing them towards the put a label on it. Because if it's got a diamond and I have to stand up in court, I can say I've taken the most prudent route, despite it being in contravention of the harmonized classification. I'd rather put a label on it and inform people than not. And I think if you look at the logic, because L-limonene is a 410, the mixture of the racemic mixture is a 410. Why is D not under EU? But there you go. That's the madness of the whole thing.
Well, it's more that the other forms of limonene should have been included in the harmonised classification, and they weren't on a technicality. So we know that, and apparently they're changing the way that they look at harmonised classification on related substances. But having said that, I'm with you, Adam. The thing is, you could always put it in and go, for transport it is classified as this, and have a little note saying, you know, we have to do this. This is the problem with the dual SDS, if you're still trying to do a dual SDS, isn't it?
It's actually not a dual SDS, it's more a case of from a software perspective at the moment how our ADR.
Yeah.
So you can, as a client, choose to remove ADR of your EU regulations, or you can choose to remove ADR of the GB regulations.
Yeah.
And at the moment, one overwrites the other, whether you should, in theory, have completely different ADR classifications on the two different safety data. Oh, it really.
Yeah, that's good.
Just while this is sort of talk a little bit behind, one of the reasons I've come today is to actually find examples of where UK companies that have difficulty getting product into the EU for whatever HCRP customs, so that we can educate our people in Europe to at least know who to turn to. So while we're having this discussion, if anyone's got any examples, if you wouldn't mind just jotting them down in a bit of paper, give them to me at the end, because I don't want you all on the sandwich and forgetting all about it. So while it's in everybody's kind of thoughts, I'll take anything at all, as I say, it's just so that we can go back. I have to admit, when we do get these issues, we tend to come to the self-help. But I don't, if that becomes official government practice, that's absolutely fine. I would like our people in Europe to know what to do in these cases, because quite a lot of times they just throw their hand up and say, what's that all about? So please, if you have any examples, jot them down, pass them to me before the end of the day, or give it a jam through the minutes, and we'll take it away and see what we can do.
No, that's great, thank you. Yeah. Does anyone want to raise any other divergence questions? Or we'll move on to EUCL.
Things on divergence, but related to BPR and active substances.
Yeah.
So we're seeing that some of the substances under the EU program are being approved in the EU. And in some cases, they are the last in a formulation. Some of these are toll manufactured for our members, and the toll manufacturer isn't wanting to do. We've got a COPR registration for England and Northern Ireland, but we don't want to do PPR for Northern Ireland. It's not worth it, market's concerned. And obviously, in the Northern Ireland, you have to submit directly to HSE. They might decide that they will do a BPR in Europe somewhere, and then mutual recognition. So if they don't want to do it for Northern Ireland, you can still put products on the market, which you give them substances to the approval of the DB. So we're beginning to see potential loss of
Anyone else got experience with biocidal products?
Yeah, we're trying to reformulate at the moment. That Austin is going to ask about. The original plan was to go from the current active
to a different chain length of the active. So because that would just slightly delay our BPR applications. But the fact that they're finding some difficulties doing that and want to use both of these chemicals now in whatever concentrations they decide. But what they've been asking me is how much of the new non-approved so far active has to be in there for it to count as an active. And I said that when you show it's effective. Yeah, and I just want to double check that, because they're like, well, so I put a little bit in, and then most use what we're using all the time. Is that all right? I'm like, only if you can show this is having an action. So basically, if you take the mixture with both actives in it and it does this, and then you take the mixture with the current active in it and it does something that's not quite as much but still happening, and vice versa, then that's all right. But if you take it with the current active and the new active, take the new active out, and it's still pretty much the same thing, then it's not really doing anything, is it?
Therefore, it's not an active under BPR. Yeah.
Interesting.
Hmm.
We'll have one or two questions on EU CLP, and then we'll break for more coffee. If that sounds like a plan.
Lots more coffee, please.
Lots more coffee. But we'll start with Sola, who has a question following up on chemical
Well, it's more of a report, really.
under pressure.
Yeah.
So when GHS 8 was in force, which I think is it January?
We don't know yet when GHS revision 8 comes into force. No, the state of play with GHS revision 8, for everybody who hasn't heard, is that it's being discussed at the EU. And then, Ali, you'll know better on timescales than me.
Delegated Act 44.
Ah, is that the thing? It's coming in. Is that coming in January 2026? Then, do we think?
They'll shoot that. Delegated Act end of the year. They're saying doesn't need to go through voting, so
Yeah.
start of the new year, but it'll be like an 18.
Yeah. And then GB is thinking about what to do about delegated act.
No word on GB.
No word on GB.
No word on
Well, of
GB.
course, Sola, you're selling into the EU and into GB both, so this is an important thing for you. Sorry, on you go.
Some new H bases are coming under pressure, and they're just a little bit concerned about what the donor implications are going to be for that. So the no leaks, mostly the H bases were used for aerosols. So it's like really good
Yeah.
changes.
So coming on in, it'll be Cerveza, so it'll be the EU. And I genuinely haven't seen anything like updating Cerveza.
No.
So it's likely that Cerveza will continue on using the old.
Yeah, I think there's several things going on here, if I can just butt in slightly. Under the current practices, you can either classify your, in Sola's case, adhesives under pressure as aerosols, or you could do it as pressurized gas, but it's flammable gas. And the difference in tonnage band is, for a flammable gas, it's 50 tons for the lower tier threshold, and for aerosols, it's 5,000 tons. So you've got kind of a bit of a big reason to classify them as aerosols. And literally, you know, I've heard nothing from the health and safety side of things, and I am frankly not flagging it up with the HSE. Because there are all sorts of weird things with Cerveza, like they never included flammable solids, which were in under the chip days, so that just disappeared as a coma, a reason for being in coma. So you're right, Ali, it may come through or it may not. But in the meantime, I think, Sola, you're classifying as aerosols because it means it keeps you out of coma, basically, doesn't it?
So it's more understanding for the end user in the labeling. So our safety data sheets just contradicts in section 3 and section 14. So it's not incorrect. But yes, we've started seeing a lot of review customers trying to classify their labels. So I've got one customer wants to put in pressure cylinder on and put flammable gas. And I've got somebody else who wants to put in flammable gas, but not pressure cylinder. Take that off, it's flammable. And there's a lot of confusion because I've seen these H phases come in the US and like the track is just confusing.
Yeah, and of course the chemicals under pressure does have the gas under pressure. And if it's flammable, it will have flammable as well, yeah. Oh,
I think document your decision making for your coma.
yeah,
certification.
absolutely.
Well, what I would say is that we will update, because it would be annex of survey, so it would be a delegated act, so they would be able to update it fairly rapidly. But somebody at the EU has to realise that we've made it out of date.
But nobody say anything. Just for the time being, and hopefully.
At some point during the 18-month transition, somebody at the Environment Committee will realise that they've made surveys out of date, and they will do an update. But surveys from coma will continue to be out of date because there's no plans to update GB0.
Okay. Oh. We'll have one more on EUCLP. Does anyone think an eye corrosion pictogram would be helpful? This is from Ashley at
Suffolk, yeah. This is what we were going to discuss, and I was going to bring up the potential symbols. If you remember, the issue that we have is that something is classified as corrosive under CLP and it attracts the generic corrosive symbol, and it's not classified as corrosive for transport. And if it's got no transport label on it at all, then people see the CLP labels and they go, that's corrosive, why is it not corrosive under ADR? And it's a massive, massive issue. And we had a situation where I believe it was Avocet had products stopped at the airport for air freight, and the only way around it, and it was classified under ADR, and they ended up putting a black plastic outer to hide the CLP label so that it was actually able to go on the plane. And this was like days late on a really, really urgent delivery. So we talked to the HSE, I think it was 2015, and we said, hey guys, and at this point, I'm going to shout out to James Barton sitting at the back there, who did us some beautiful, beautiful pictograms. And they turned around and they said, and it was all based on a lovely eye and, you know, sort of an eye with corrosive things happening. And they turned around and they said, we're not going to take that to GHS, because we asked them nicely. And they said, we're not going to take it to GHS because the eye symbol is too much of a hot topic. And so Ashley raised this very question about 2 months ago on LinkedIn, and I was all over it like a rash because it's still a problem. We have actually done I've done some new drafts, and it's not James's quality, but I have got some different pictograms that don't have, it's more like an icon for an eye, or using glasses instead of an eye. And what I'll do is in the break, I'll put them up on the screen for people in the room so that you can have a look and see what you think. Because I still think it's worthwhile taking it to the HSE and possibly GHS, because it's a practical thing, isn't it, everybody?
And that's a difference of whether you've got washing up the asset, and you've got exactly the same picture.
Yeah, Sean, you're absolutely right. It's outrageous, really, isn't it? And that's why under CHIP, serious eye damage did not attract a corrosive headache. I mean, I could bore for Britain about the transport and CLP thing, and I won't, but yeah.
To be honest, the bigger issue between transport and CLP is where you're classifying the product as corrosive due to pH and PHO. Because
yes,
then under ADR you do not have to classify as corrosive, but it is corrosive in the CLP. So I'll be honest, I think we're going to get this problem with
that's a great point, but equally there are things that just don't make any sense in transport, like why is a Cat 1A carcinogen not in transport when you have a single exposure and you could get cancer from it? It doesn't matter that it's not an immediate hazard, you've got the immediate harm. I told you I could bore.
I've seen the statistics on the current pictograms, and the fact is you're only getting like 70% of people who understand what corrosive pictogram is. If you introduce another pictogram, it's just more stuff for people to not understand.
So
there's a reason there's a limited number of pictograms, and it's trying to,
but it's genuinely the eye is much more sensitive than the skin. Why should we have why can we not differentiate them? And particularly for consumers, the number of times we've had people going, I need you to reformulate this consumer product because I am not putting a corrosive symbol out there on the shelves of, you know, whatever.
Maybe rather than pushing for a new symbol, try and push back to go how we did with chips and push them back to the
exclamation
rather
out.
than having a new picture.
Well, then we've your question now about why isn't the CMR not covered? Why is eye corrosion not as transport classification?
Because it's is it as hazardous as skin corrosion?
If you go outside of the EU and the UK, you have this issue with the aquatic pictogram because you have an aquatic pictogram required for stuff that isn't environmentally hazardous for ADR. It's just that we don't have those categories over here. This isn't the only place where you run into this concern. The answer is they don't want more pictograms because it makes it more difficult for people to understand what the hazards are. The issue isn't that people who do the transport of dangerous goods are finding this difficult. They should be educated. The problem is that are we making it a problem for consumers? And if the consumers are treating it as more hazardous than it actually is, that's probably a good thing. From the point of view of the regulators, that's a good thing. Right? If you introduce a lower status pictogram, then you introduce a risk of consumers not giving it the concern that it should have. So they're not going to let you introduce another one. And to be honest, I probably don't think that you should.
And I'll be honest, the amount of consumers, myself included, who will get on the cleaner and just be like, whatever. Right? I mean, granted, I come from chemistry background, so we were quite blasé about it.
People in the labs are worst at health and safety.
Yeah, but at the same time, you try and explain to someone what the difference is.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I read the backs of packets because I'm a nerd and this is my job. But
how many cleaning blogs are out there when it's like, oh, you don't want to use any of those harmful chemicals? Look, you can make this in your own kitchen. Yeah, and it's like just this chlorine gas coming off that.
Yeah, let's fix some baking soda with some drain cleaner.
Great idea.
Oh, I still love the one that we had that was actually brought on the paper that someone decided to mix cleaning products and nearly killed themselves. Rescue success on top.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I think we are descending into a general conversation, so we'll take that opportunity for a coffee, and we'll be back in 15 minutes.
Maybe slightly longer.
Maybe, I'll say 15 minutes because it's always more.
Yeah, I don't think it's natural for us to say. Yeah. Zoom meeting. Yep. Hello, Mission World. Can you hear us? Thanks, Colin.
Right, thank you everybody. I hope you are feeling thoroughly refreshed and replenished after some more lukewarm coffee and some lovely donuts. Missed out on donuts. I don't know what you're missing. Straight back into it, back on EU CLP. How do people deal with the cut-off values for corrosives when classifying for irritancy? This is from Colin McGregor.
Yeah, at Marriott Graphics.
Yep.
We've invoiced them. We think that they might be rejoining. We don't know. Colin thought because he was getting the weekly newsletter, that meant he was still part of the group. No. So, but yes, he has said, send me an invoice. They're up in, I think it's North Berwick. So we never see him physically, but he came through with an absolutely cracking question, which is that when you read the notes to table 1.1 for the cutoff values in CLP, it says for corrosives or otherwise stated, and it gives you a little link to the corrosives classification with later on in CLP. And that says that you have the ability to have a different corrosive cutoff value, because it's 1% is a cutoff for irritants and 1% for corrosives for both skin and eyes. But then there's this kind of get out clause saying, or you can use a different classification, a cutoff value for corrosives.
1% asterisk, although where relevant.
Yeah, where relevant. Now, I'd always interpreted the where relevant as meaning where you've got a harmonized classification and you go, or sorry, rather a specific concentration limit, which are mainly in the harmonized classifications, but not always. They can be in the REACH dossiers. And you would be using that as a cutoff limit, because you can't have, if you've got an SCL that says 0.1% and your cutoff's 1%, then clearly you're going to use 0.1% as your cutoff value. But what Colin's argument, which was really interesting, is this: if you have got a corrosive and you've got a mixture that isn't corrosive, but you've got a corrosive substance and a couple of irritants, you're then going to use that corrosive component in your irritancy calculation, and you're going to give it a factor of 10. You're going to give it a weighting for the irritancy classification. And why on earth would you not have a factor of 10 cutoff value for irritancy for corrosive sin? So he's basically saying, why are you weighting it for the calculation but not for the cutoff value? Because his theory would be 1% corrosive cutoff value for corrosive, but 0.1% cutoff value for corrosive when it is used in the irritancy calculation.
Go on, Ali.
Okay, story time.
Speak up for Zoomland, please.
When I was in industry and the chemists found out that the cutoff for classification for corrosive was 1%, and we used to formulate. So they used to put everything in at 0.95%. 5 or 6 corrosive components at 0.95%. Sometimes up to 10 corrosive components at 0.95%, knowing that the software would not classify that. So I called the asterisk the don't take the piss clause. And it's why software is not a press the button and classify. So the reason SDS authoring is a skill is because it requires somebody to take a look at the formulation and make these judgment calls. And the asterisk is a judgment call. It's a, is there something in this formulation that I should be taking into account that is not the normal situation? So obviously, if you have a bunch of things in there that are just below 1%, you should be taking that into account. In order to fix the issue I had at that company, I reset the software to make the limit 0.1% for about 3 years until they learned a lesson. It was the only way to solve the problem. Once they all stopped doing that, I set it back to 1% and the problem was solved because they stopped putting stuff in at 0.95%, knowing that it would classify, because it would classify and we solved the problem. We also sent a couple of products off to be tested, and they proved that they were in fact corrosive, and they really had to stop doing this. But yeah, the asterisk is there for you to use common sense. If you are ridiculously close to the point at which your cumulative amount of corrosive components is going to tip you into classification, or when you know that when they actually make these products, they are not accurate enough to be low in popular thrust, because you have enough give and take either way in a batch that you're clearly going to be over that threshold in some cases, then classify. But classification is not something where you press a button and it's right every time. There's give and take, and it takes an expert. And that's what we're there for.
Oh, here comes the software house.
I'm going to say, coming from the software perspective, so the other end of the stick, our clients expect us to give them the answer. And as much as Ali's preaching is completely correct, and that's exactly the kind of preaching that we like to do to our clients when they listen, most of them don't. So they want a one button press, or I've got a magic button answer. In terms of software, I've worked at 3 different software houses, and I've had limits of 1%, and I've had limits of 0.1%, depending on which software we're talking about. What is important to note is in all situations, there's the ability to override or change that limit, either as a global setting, so every single kind of corrosive substance would use that new setting, or you can change it for a specific substance. So for example, if you knew that certain acids or bases within your software were much more likely to be causing an issue, then you could specify those ones. And in terms of training, if we did give software training, which included any kind of regulatory side to it, which I'll be honest, doesn't always happen, we would try and emphasize the need for this particular type of calculation to be an expert judgment one. And that exactly Ali's point, that SDS authoring, it should not be a one button press solution. However, a lot of people do take it that way, in which case we have to be quite binary about it. Most will go with 1% just because it's legally the easiest one for us to back ourselves on. But I have seen 0.1% as well, because legally, as a standard, we can argue that too.
Well, I mean, personally, we know that these cut-off values come out of GHS. If you have a look at individual corrosive components in the harmonised classifications with an SCL, they can deal with the difference. You know, it is this in irritancy, it is that for the corrosives. But the cut-off values themselves can't deal with having 2 cut-off values, one for when it's in the corrosive and one when it's in the irritant. And I don't know if that's a GHS requirement, just they're trying to make everything so simple that everybody can understand it. But there's nothing stopping you as an individual company or an individual classifier going, you know what, Colin's right, I'm going to do 0.1% cutoff for corrosives. You know, at least when they, you know, if it doesn't work at this level, then when we get to irritancy, I'm going to include it in the irritancy calculation.
One thing that will pop up if you set it as 0.1 is the requirement to put components that contribute to the corrosive classification in the contained statement of the label. Because what will happen is you will quite quickly get more than 4 substances contributing, and you will have to start making decisions about what you put in the contained statement of the mixture on the label.
Yeah.
And some software is easier to manipulate than others when it comes to making those decisions. Otherwise, you will get really long labels and lots of information on. But it gets tricky. So if you are going to make a decision to reset it at 0.1, other decisions will soon follow, and it can.
But that's for the corrosive calculation, and Colin is specifically about the irritancy calculation. Oh, and can I just say, and I know I've said this about 1 million times, speaking as someone who is very allergic, if you have sensitizers, put them all on the label at EUH208 level. I don't care if you end up with 20. Please put it on, because the consequences for those of us who are rather sensitive are horrendous. And no, I don't give a stuff about the software houses that happen to be in the room. Just do it, people.
Yeah, even the ones that are down at 1.5 ppm.
It depends on well, 1.5 ppm is sensitizing for biocides probably.
Yeah,
but yeah, if it's triggering EUH208 or H318 or especially H334, I got occupational asthma with isoflurane. So if anybody wants to bump me off, sugar beet herbicide is the way to go. Fenmedifam. Yeah, sorry.
Just on what Ali said, sending stuff for testing. If you want the definitive answer, get your mixture tested, and then you've got the evidence to prove it is corrosive or irritant one way or the other.
And test the range, the most concentrated one in the range, and if that passes, you're good.
Don't let development send it off to the test they think will be best.
No.
Excellent point.
Most conservative.
That development person did all the work for us, but I'm sure the eye corrosion test was picked
to pass.
Yeah.
Picked to pass the test, not picked to be worst case.
Yeah.
That was our, oh no, it's not our last topic on EU CLP. We have one more over the page from Kath.
Who can't be here, so we have Stevie.
Yes. One from Kath.
Oh,
back to Janet's point just now.
Yeah. Since it's with SCLs, because we got pulled up by one of our customers for their labelling that we missed the sensitizer because it's required an SCL without our famous house noticing or pointing it out to us. So we are wondering whether there's more skin sensitizers being analysed in the EU to get SCLs put on them. I think this is back from Chemicare. I can't for the life remember what the substance was and stuff. It might have been hexalcinamide.
Yeah, there's certainly, I mean, there's hundreds, or it seems like there's hundreds of farm-nice classification proposals at the moment, isn't there? And they're definitely, and Adam Batting, I think you will back me up on this. The EU is definitely cracking down on fragrance components massively. It's not just the limonene, there's you're right, is it alpha cinnamaldehyde or alpha hexalcinnamaldehyde, I think. So in practical terms, what's coming through the HCs, I think we're seeing more of them. But I don't know what is going on at ECHA or the EU and whether people think, or I've heard that there's going to be more focus on that.
Is this just a follow-on of the 2018 deadline and more data being sent to the authorities and now we're working through it all?
It may be, Neil, good point.
You know, and perhaps there wasn't a lot of information previously available on that particular endpoint or classification category. Now there is a lot more new information available to the regulators on that endpoint, and this is now the consequence.
That endpoint hierarchy of testing as well, filtering through more information on that on sensitization that's come since 2018.
Or even dossier compliance or substance evaluation generating,
picking up those
new information as well.
Yeah, I must admit, if you've asked me a fragrance component generic classification, it would be H317, H412, basically. So,
Ali?
Yeah, it's also the cross-sensitization project. Started, I want to say 3 years ago, at consultation stage. So getting essentially anecdotal evidence. So how do people feel about this? Do people notice this? Is a good thing? Also getting feedback from consumers. But it's moving forward now into actual work being done and analysis being done. But it does mean that SCLs are being set lower to combat the fact that people are using more than one sensitizer at a time and that products are being used in combination. So things like the isothiazolone, people are using one, they're using 2 or 3 at the same time and they have the same mechanism mode of action. So you know, you're not looking at one SCL for one substance and then another SCL for another substance completely separately. You're looking at the combined effect. So they're setting SCLs lower. Yeah. So it's part of that is contributing.
I suspect that's the whole problem with fragrances, because you'll reformulate a fragrance, or the fragrance will reformulate a fragrance when something's classified, but to keep it smelling the same, you'll be using something similar, and then that's going to get classified as
And from a realistic perspective, everyone's always going to play the classification game, whatever happens. But from a slightly side note, a slightly different aspect, if you read the news quite a lot, allergies, reactions to allergies, they're becoming much more kind of common in the news. Is it Master Fashions Law or Natalie's? But there was one where a girl ate a sandwich in prep, the sandwich was labelled correctly and dying. Those kind of things are hitting the general news, and therefore consumer awareness of allergies is much, much higher. They also think that due to our lifestyle and the fact that we obviously live in the dirt a lot less than perhaps we used to, that a lot of allergies are actually worse, particularly amongst young children, and they're coming on, and therefore allergies are getting more and more prevalent. So I would suspect those kind of pressures at a more general level are then going to start feeding down. And also what Ali's talking about is the cocktail effect, which is actually sometimes by mixing different fragrances that are perhaps similar, they can not only add together to create a effect that would be the equivalent of adding directly, it can actually multiply each other. And that's something that I know ECHA is concerned about and has been for a while, because in particular around endocrine disruptors as well, but that's a particularly massive problem. But I would sort of sensitizers, you're going to have the same idea. So I would, and also at the end of the day, never say never. You can't say that another skin sensitizer, SDL, is going to come down that line.
I think it's also about sensitizer identification, because if you look spoke to Eric Edmonds, toxicologist, who we have a client in common, and he said that the list of medical sensitizers is something silly like 30,000, and the number of sensitizers that are identified on the harmonized classification list is tiny in comparison. So we should maybe expect to see more substances being classified as sensitizers going forward, and then out of those, then presumably more SCLs as well.
Just no more children in the sheep pen.
I'll have a quick look and see if there is a timeline or an action plan for the cross sensitization project. And that at least might give you an idea for the index, because I haven't looked at that. I know that it's happening and roughly where it's up to, but yeah, I'll see if we can get a more definite idea within the room.
Okay. Any more on EU CLP or CLP in general, GHS, those types of questions from the room or from the Zoom? No?
Anything on Zoom? Hang on, Agnes coming back in.
Okay, we'll move on to any other business or miscellaneous topics. EUDR, is there a way for UK companies to access the EUDR website?
This was really embarrassing, because tenants were opposite our stand at Chem UK, and this bloke who I hadn't seen turned up on the last day, because obviously I'd seen their people building the stand and everything, and who was on there, and this bloke just sort of popped up out of nowhere and said, I've got this question, I'm trying to do the EUDR stuff from the UK, and I sign up and it recognizes that I'm from the UK and it's telling me to bugger off. And all I could say to him was, do you have a legal entity in the EU? And he said, oh yeah, we've got an office in Ireland, in the Republic. And I was like, well, can you not sign up as them and pretend you're there? And he was like, yeah, do I need to do a VPN? I was like, no, I don't think so. As long as you've got the login from the EU, you should be okay. Was that the correct approach, people? Because Ali's nodding. I think we're okay. Yeah. EUDR, like everything, if you're doing direct reporting, you need to have a legal entity. Oh,
yeah, it would be that EU entity doing the report.
Yeah, I don't think he's even on this. He's not even on the list. Yeah.
There's a software program called Prisma. That's through which you have enter the data and stuff, and it's linked to the customs. funding to that whole system, but you have to, register with this software program. And then you have to put your company details in.
You reminded me, Vinny, he actually said that when he put his EORI in for the UK, that was the point that it kind of, so you have to basically use the EORI for the legal entity in the EU that you're doing it.
We have an account.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, so you do have a UK account.
Kerry in chat is saying she had a similar issue with F-gas reporting and had to pretend to be Dutch to do it.
Oh, good. Well, that was an easy one.
There we go. Now that EU detergents regs have been provisionally approved, do we have any idea of what will be required in a product passport?
Stevie's looking
Do
guilty.
we want to hide under the table for digital product passports? Do we have any idea of how digital product passports can practically work? Ali, do you want me to wheel out your high horse?
Yeah.
Or your soapbox, which would you prefer?
Loving this, right?
Just to check, detergents are the first thing going forward? No,
detergents are not the first thing with the digital product passport. The one you should be watching for this is batteries.
Oh, right.
Which is why nobody can find it.
Well, perhaps you might be able to.
Yeah, batteries were first out the gate, which means that it's the timeline for batteries that sets the timeline for digital product passports. So the first implementation date for batteries is January 27, which means that the specification for the digital product passport has to be out by January 26. So we're looking for a delegated act, I think guys, this is where I am with this. I'm looking for a delegated act for January 26. And I don't think it's coming from the Environment Committee. I think it's coming from the Internal Market Committee. So I've been scouring their website. I haven't found the digital product passport spec, but I have found a regulation to better integrate the digital product passport that will remove the CE mark, which was news to me, given that the UK is currently in the process of passing legislation so that we will accept CE mark. So that's going to be helpful. So that's fun.
Sorry, the digital product passport will effectively replace the CE mark?
Yep.
That seems to be coming through on a lot of things where they look at the toys and construction of various regulations where they are bringing in DPP, where in some of the proposals there is potential for a CE mark, and that seems to be introduced away from the DPP, but a lot of it's not on proposal stage, so where it's going to be. And
This
the
would do it.
ESPR had something about delegated acts to bring in the DPP, and obviously the ESPR as a sort of moving on from the batteries regulations and labeling new appliances into more requirements to grade your products. But no control the ESPR delegate that from the ESPR.
It should do, yeah. So Eco Design for Sustainable Products, ESPR, is the parent framework. So under ESPR, you will find a legislative act for each sector, essentially. So batteries, detergents, paints will eventually come, lubricants, construction products, and all of these are in progress at various stages, some of them still in working groups, but some of them in draft and some of them coming out. So detergents announced, batteries out, and the first one out the gate was batteries. All of these require digital product passport in them somewhere. The digital product passport has to have 12 months in order to implement. So because batteries need it by January 27, it has to be specified by January 26. So that's where we are on the timeline. So digital product passport has to be specified by January 26. First one out the gate has to be that.
Unless it's just-
I might try and get extensions to modify it for some of the later ones, but
Maybe they'll bring on a reality check application.
I just like the fact that they're already adapting it to extend and expand it when they haven't specified the damn thing yet. But yes, toys is in there as well, and as part of this, they've decided that they want a new, they're calling it the NLP, NLF, new legislative framework. That's the update that's going to remove the CE mark and replace it with digital product passports, which I will forward to you, Janet, so that you can publish the numbering that's on the top of it.
So we know what it is, yeah.
So that's drafted, that's moving. Which again, would put it as implemented before the digital product passport is actually here, which is hilarious. I still cannot find the actual draft or working group that is specifying the digital product passport. I just know that it has to be out by January.
There's one group that's sort of setting out the specification of the product passport and how it works technically running on the product passport. And then the content that needs to be in the product passport is going to be dependent on the product. So for batteries, that battery regulation will specify what needs to be in a digital product passport for batteries. Under the ESPR framework, they have specified the first group of products that they're going to be looking at. Paints wasn't in there. Furniture was, so paint on furniture might be in there, but paints themselves not. And they will then specify what content is needed in the product passport for those product groups.
So I have the timeline for the product groups and roughly where they are and when they should come out. With the framework for the digital product passport, they're supposed to also be specifying essentially things like what the base programming is and how it should interact so that it can be transferred through the supply chain. And I almost think that's more important than what fields should be in it, because the EU is still saying they're not going to host it. Well, someone's got to build the thing so you can actually transfer it up and down the supply chain so that you can send it. Like if you're a manufacturer, you've got to send it to your formulator so they can add documents so they can send it to your customer, and it's got to move through the supply chain so you can add things to it and then ultimately transfer it to customs if necessary, and then transfer it to market surveillance if you're putting something like a toy on the market. So that specification has to be there, even regardless of what data you end up putting in it. That framework has to,
yeah.
Yeah, but the detergents regulation was in draft. It was saying this digital product passport is still needed to wait for ESPR to be brought in to law and then the framework is so that they can bring it's not there yet.
and it's the framework. It doesn't have the number in the Comcast. It doesn't have any of that yet, and I can't find it.
Okay, so
I know who should have it. I know the committee that should have it. I have their working plans. I have their working groups. It's not listed, but the modification of it is. But the initial implementing act isn't there.
Well, we had that, if you remember, because we had the amendments to the Delegated Act to CLP before the Delegated Act was published. So they are kind of moving in that direction. By the way, speaking of simplification, Adam's put a thing in about EUDR has been asked to be included in the simplification effort, and he's put PDF in, so we'll add that into the notes as well. But it seems to me that the digital product passport is supposed to be a simplification. If it's going to remove the CE mark, it's going to cover all these different things, and yet miraculously it seems to involve about 100 times more work than normal for industry.
It absolutely does. The latest date it can possibly be is January 26th.
Yeah, so it's a watch this space, isn't it?
I'll keep looking. It's got to be there.
Could we send Ali across to the relevant committee meeting, do you think?
I don't think they must be there.
Not doing not to go.
Yeah, yeah. So for Kath, watching on catch up, watch this space basically. We can't say anything more than that.
Okay, a couple more things left today. Adam, you have a question on fragrances.
Well, I think it's good news, which is rare in these sorts of things. So, as any of you that deal with fragrances or anything to do with the fragrance space, you'll know that California generally blazes a trail and bans everything before you're allowed to use it. So a bill started going through called AB-2201 about toxics in air care products. So this covers pretty much anything with a fragrance in. Could be kitchen cleaners, could be candles, could be diffusers, could be anything. And they were trying to ban a load of the old favorites. So Lilial is on there, which is mostly banned anyway, but a lot of the newer ones, Galixolide and some of the more quaternium salts, but diethyl phthalate made it onto the list, which is widely used as a carrier in fragrances. And I think by association, because they also put on the known phthalates that are endocrine disruptors, DEP doesn't have it. So there are quite a few on there. Luckily, and it seems, the bill has died. Now, I'm never sure with American legislation, especially California, whether dead means dead. But where we are at the moment, it says died on their website, so I will link it in. So if people want to have a look at it, and I messaged a mate of mine who works in the fragrance industry in America, and he says it's as dead as it can be, but it might come back to life later. But it is pretty much dead, which is great because it was going to cause all sorts of problems for a lot of ingredients that you wouldn't be able to sell in California. So I put the link in the chat, but just a little bit of good news at the end. We pretty much think it's dead.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. Thank you. Adam.
I think it's Diane. No?
Diane, you have a question on Ukraine Reach.
Yeah, Ukraine Reach has got a pre-registration deadline of January 2026. As part of that pre-registration, you need to submit full compositional information for substance. So you need to submit percentage purity, concentration of main components, any additives, any impurities, etc. Reckitt, we formulate finished products, liquids in a bottle or articles, and we don't have access to that compositional information. So I was wondering, or we were wondering how people are tackling this. What are people doing? We know what we're putting in our products, we know the raw materials, we know the breakdown, we know the percentages, but we don't have that compositional information for substances. Would potentially manufacturers in the EU be willing to share that information, compositional information, either with Ukrainian importers or via an OR or a consultant that confidentiality can be maintained? But yeah, just what are people doing? Any advice, any guidance, any thoughts?
Any experience with Ukraine?
I am no longer at the consultant, we've got a Ukraine Reach office, but that is a potential option, is that going through, because obviously you need the Ukraine entity doing submissions as well.
We have a Ukrainian entity, but it's getting that data.
So obviously whether you want to contact my former employers and ask for their advice directly, obviously I don't know whether USP
We don't have an entity in the Ukraine at the moment. But yeah,
still, I guess the issue there is we still need the data. Would the say it was reached law in Ukraine, but they have.
There's a potential for putting NDA and agreements with your suppliers.
Yes.
Yeah, difficult to getting information.
If you're an EU entity predominantly, you've got the same issue with the UK, with Ukraine, with Turkey. It's is your supply chain willing to disclose certain information? You can only ask the question of your suppliers to start with.
It's a global issue. I mean, most people don't have supply chains that are only in Europe.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of times, a classic one is with the sensitizers, MIT. In China, can be in significantly higher concentrations without being disclosed. How do I know? They're not going to tell me.
No, I mean, it's exactly the same with people buying mixtures from outside the UK and needing to know for UK reach. And the usual way is to appoint a third party consultant under a sort of three-way NDA, as it were. So the consultant will have an NDA with the supplier outside GB and with the company. And sometimes, and we've seen this happen as well, there'll be one company doing the new SDS, as it were, for GB, and somebody else doing the reach work. So you have an extra, and you've got these sort of layers of NDAs. But yeah, third party is generally, in our experience, the way to go.
The concept is the same wherever you are in the world. It's no data, no market. So if they won't tell you, you can't sell it there. And your options are ask them. If they won't tell you, ask them if they'll tell you under NDA. And if they won't tell you under NDA, will they tell a neutral third party under NDA so that you never know? And those are your only options. And if you still can't get that information, no data, no market. And it doesn't matter what country you're talking about, even if you're talking about trying to bring something into the UK. If you don't know what's in it, you can't do it.
No.
And it's a harsh answer, but it's the answer.
And also, I think it's important to recognise that you don't have to have a consultant in the Ukraine to get the disclosed information to. You've got your Ukrainian legal entity. You can have somebody in the UK doing everything in English. And it's not, that kind of work is not jurisdiction dependent, is it?
No, we need your supplier to appoint, I assume you need your supplier to appoint a UK-based OR.
Ukraine-based.
Ukraine-based OR, But
I believe it's a submission down in Ukrainian as well.
Yeah.
There's submission to the Ukrainian, so.
Or you need to give that information to your customer in the Ukraine who's taking on responsibility for Ukraine reach. Ukraine, oh my God.
If your entity is in Ukraine and you're shipping from Europe or UK to the Ukraine,
so you've got both possibilities.
The obligation is with your company, whether it's the exporting entity appointing an OR, you're using that, or your Ukraine entity being importer. We had a similar example with a large car manufacturer who their supply chains, they bought everything to their German warehouse and then shipped it to the UK. And they forgot about Brexit. All their paints, functional fluids, lubricants, oils, all of that needed registration or needed UK reach coverage. And we had to unpick their supply chain for them to get OR coverage through their various suppliers and then do late doings for stuff that their suppliers wouldn't cover. It was a bit of a mess. But we got there. But in the UK, it's slightly different because we've got this transitional period. In the Ukraine, you've not necessarily got the benefit of that. So,
for example, the UK turned the requirements for all less about that full composition information. So the UK, some of the doing Turkey, it's basically what you're importing and the cast number is a lot simpler. But it's that full composition information.
And that's the challenge, is because if you've got various suppliers supplying the same substance through in mixtures to say your company in the EU that's then going to the Ukraine, you need to know that for your, you need to know that full compositional data.
But the products that you're sending from the UK to the Ukraine, are you also sending them to Turkey? Because it's the same requirements into Turkey.
There's requirements a lot less.
No, but you still got to do.
Different levels of
the Ukraine is almost
registration parts. It's a lot of the data requirements for the Ukraine are a lot higher. Can I also point out that even in the EU and Turkey, you need to know the full composition because you don't know that you need to know something unless you know what it is. It could be that it has an OEL in the UK or it's affected by some slightly different regulations that we now have. So until you know the full formulation, in theory, no market.
I mean, I must admit, one of our customers who is a household name, who I have just sacked, by the way, they and who WSP are hopefully going to take over for me. No pressure, guys. their conditions of sale include you must disclose full formulation. And everything they buy just about is from China. And all you can do in terms of due diligence is go, we think they've given us full disclosure. But yeah, it needs to be baked in, and the conditions of sale can be either to ourselves or to a named third party or whatever, or a mutually acceptable third party under NDA. But you need to get your purchasing people on board. It's not just about what happens once it gets onto the regulatory person's desk, is it? Speak up, please.
Previous experience is I have managed to get information from suppliers through NDA multiple times in years, and some of them to the point actually just gave me a limited dossier for section. So it is possible, you just have to ask. The other option is getting the team more intensive.
We make, a company the size of Reckitt's probably got some leverage there.
The problem with the testing what you've done is if you find the formulation,
Yeah.
you get the individual components for your impurities in your substances.
Go
which
to your
is what's required in the grade, depending on what you're buying.
Yeah.
If you are actually buying the substance, then.
Get-
So what is substances and it's the raw materials, it's a mixture,
Yeah,
so
Yeah.
proprietary essentially.
And-
A level of information about
Yeah. And I'd strongly recommend, if you think somebody is lying, get the tests done.
Nick's got a great point there about the size of the company. You do have leverage. So an NDA doesn't just say, I agree not to share this information. It may say, we agree to purchase a minimum of this much or to have a supply agreement for this many years in return for you sharing this data. If there's leverage you can put in an NDA. Bring your procurement team on board, speak to them about what you can offer in exchange for this data. Your company has leverage.
And for God's sake, make sure that you say if there is any change in the quality or the number of composition, that you are informed immediately prior to the supply of that material. That's something that gets missed on a lot of contracts.
And the threat is if that material goes into a product which is so globally, you can't sell it into a particular market, you could offer to reformulate their supply out of that product, potentially. It might be an empty threat, but you can still try it.
I've also done NDAs previously where it's only shared with the regulatory department.
Yeah.
So never shared with technology or never shared specifically with procurement. So they cannot seek an alternative supply source or cannot look for a cheap alternative. Only you, as the regulatory department, hold that information.
I think all of the NDA guidelines in place for under.
Yeah.
I struggle with this. How do companies have a business where they only have one supplier? I mean, I've had issues where we've sort of like had to needing information for EU, where the product's gone in as a mixture of a polymer, so you want the monomers and you need all the information, but we don't have one supplier. A business can't operate on one supplier. Very rarely, unless you've got a very, very good business relationship, commercial relationship. Yeah, no, there's certain industries that can do maybe, but most businesses, most chemical
Virtually
manufacturers.
every single active ingredient has a single supplier in terms of pharmaceuticals. We have to supply the active substance master file to the MHRA, and that's a huge document that's, you're not going to buy more than one of them.
No.
If you're supplying to someone like the MED, you'll generally have one approved supplier, and you might buy that raw material and put other products, but you have it under a different code, different SKU.
You have to be careful with equivalence as well. If you buy from the suppliers, it's not equivalent, the same SKU, same substance, the same.
And we've got SKUs for exhibits that go into pharmaceuticals and maybe go into a bit more into cosmetics and medical devices, because that's what we read.
Used to have a lake acid tank that was plant-based and the oleic acid, which was anything that's cheap. And you put them in different grades of product depending. So, it just depends on what you need in that particular situation.
You get organic chemistry, it's like, well, it does the same job, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
And the other one, it might do the same job for you, but it doesn't,
Yes.
it's not the same regulatory, it's completely.
This is where the regulatory team need to work with the purchasing team to ensure they are purchasing the same thing chemically and not the same thing functionally.
Yes.
In terms of innovations of the general public, is when a supplier is supplying from different sources. So when you've got, this will may come from hives or bone, and it may be cows, it may be pigs. Yeah. I'm going to get a bit upset with us.
Yeah, regulatory needs to be part of the purchasing screening.
Yeah. Which is exactly the talk I gave at Chem UK last year, saying regulatory affairs is a team sport. So I will put a link in the notes to that again, because it's useful to show people who, for example, in purchasing or in sales, that they've got to talk to you guys before they do things and not after.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Has that helped?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Okay. Has anyone got any other business? Any other questions? Anything else they want to raise?
Just want to bring up, I was reminded this week that the chemical precursor poisons regulations have been able to public benefit the use of proteins in the IDs.
Yeah.
The question that is coming down to suppliers, we need to pass it down the supply chain and do all that business there. People hated last time sending the photos of why do they need a passport? Why don't they need a driving license? At least 18 months at all, he's doing again.
Yeah.
Yes, Pastor, was it April, wasn't it? It was October it was introduced, it was, we've had to recontact some of our customers.
Yeah, I've got the first one through to the supplier. I'm absolutely ready to send down.
Right.
Okay, Janet.
I've just got a few things to sort of finish the meeting off with. First of all, Chem UK was wildly successful for the group, and thank you ever so much for everybody who met us there and who came and helped out and talked, and especially the people who were on the discussion panel, some of whom are in this room. So she's smiling sweetly at everybody. It was really successful. I think we had something like 82 inquiries, of whom about 40 are potential industry members, which is pretty impressive. We have been invited back next year, which is really good news. And I do have we've been given a tentative stand already, but I wanted to tell everybody first in the group, and I'll put it out on the group's newsletter with the video link from today. And then I will be mentioning in the Chemicals Coffee Time newsletter as well, to sort of get the ball rolling for chemicals. I've tried to book the Moxie, but I can't seem to book. I don't know if some blighters book them wholesale, because that's directly opposite Hall 5 where we will be again.
If you book that far in advance.
Yeah, I thought I just about got to it. Okay. So, but yeah, it may be next week I can book it. But yes, so.
You wouldn't let me.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, that's good. So that's where Sam and I will be. But this year, this year coming, I will definitely not be having cocktails on my own with you, because it's too embarrassing going and asking for that cup of tea for me. Well, I think it was several cups of tea. So we did have something really interesting. There's a chap called Tom Hughes who has got an online chemical first aid course, and he has offered to put, and I think it's like a 3-hour online course. He's offered to put 5 of the self-help group members through it. So if you have people who you think would benefit from that, then let me know and we will pick people. And he's an ex-paramedic who has attended a lot of chemical incidents, and that's why he set this business up, because he knows that chemical first aid is different to normal first aid and people aren't dealing with it properly. So yeah, just email me if you've got that. And the final thing is, at Chem UK, we always say, put your card in the box and we'll give somebody free membership. I've not decided how to do that yet. Last year, Ali, we had a random number generator. We've got to assign people random numbers, and then we'll probably do it sort of online so that people can see it's live. Obviously one of our current members will also get free membership, because it's not fair to prioritise new members over existing, as it were. But yeah, that's kind of it from Chem UK. It was busy.
It was busy. It was good. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
You missed out, man.
I got good like.
Yeah, you've got the best. Yeah, we haven't got a full picture of all of the stuff, and we do have some lovely photographs.
I'll show you in a minute.
Putting up. Yeah, we'll put the photographs up on the group website for the industry members to see. Yeah, next meeting dates, I suppose now.
Yes. When's the next meeting, Janet?
I can't remember. Let me just. It's sometime in September. Let me just check on the website. The next meetings are. It's the 23rd, Tuesday, the 23rd of September, and then the famous Christmas lunch meeting is the 2nd of December. So
both back at the golf club.
Both back at the golf club, yes. So.
Okay. Has anyone got anything else they would like to raise in the room or in the Zoom? If not, we'll say thank you to everyone in Zoom land for attending. Thank you to everyone in the room. Thank you for all your contributions. And we will see you in September. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rick. Just a second.
I think someone on chat asked if we have
Yeah, so we've got, sorry, I forgot to say for the room, we've got the afternoon session with Tom and Alistair, I think. We'll just be in the room. Any slides will go to the note with the notes, but it won't be on Zoom.
Yeah, we've got to have some reason for people to come out.
Yeah.
Meet.
Engagement.
Yeah.